perishing ancient dragon's final wish, find the human who knows my name. It was just a janitor. The dragon's cave shook as another piece of the ceiling crumbled. Kyle Martinez gripped his mop tighter, watching dust settle on the freshly cleaned floor of the Smithsonian's ancient artifacts wing. The building wasn't supposed to shake like this. Not in downtown Washington. A low rumble echoed through the ventilation shaft above his head. Kyle looked up, his heart hammering. The sound was wrong. Too organic. Too deliberate. He'd worked night shifts at the museum for 3 years and never heard anything like it. The rumble came again. Louder this time. Words. Someone or something was speaking in a language that made his teeth ache. Kyle dropped his mop and ran toward the restricted archives. His security badge bounced against his chest as he sprinted past Egyptian sarcophagi and Mesopotamian tablets. The sound was coming from Storage Room 7, a chamber he'd only cleaned twice since starting this job. The door was always locked. Always. Tonight, it stood open. Orange light spilled into the hallway. Heat washed over Kyle's face as he approached. He should run. Call security. Do literally anything except walk through that door. But his feet kept moving forward. The room had changed. Instead of metal shelves and climate-controlled storage, Kyle found himself standing on the edge of a vast cavern. Impossible. The entire Smithsonian could fit in this space 10 times over. Stalactites glowed with their own inner light, casting shadows that danced across walls, covered in markings that hurt to look at directly. In the center of the cavern lay a dragon. Not a statue, not a fossil. A living, breathing dragon whose scales shimmered between gold and crimson as it struggled for each breath. One massive eye opened, fixing Kyle with a gaze that saw through him and past him and into every corner of his soul. The dragon's mouth moved. The words were alien, yet somehow Kyle understood them. Finally, I have been calling for hours. The dragon's voice resonated inside Kyle's skull. I am dying, human. I have perhaps minutes left. My kind has a tradition. Before we pass from this world, we must ensure our name is not forgotten. Kyle's throat was dry. He tried to speak, but only managed to croak. There is no time for fear, the dragon continued. I need you to do something for me. My name must be spoken by someone who knows its true meaning before I die. This is our way. This is our only path to whatever comes after. I don't understand, Kyle finally managed. Why me? I'm just a janitor because you are here. Because fate or chance or simple probability has placed you before me in my final moments. The dragon coughed and flame flickered between its teeth. I am called Zarathian the Eternal. I have lived for 8,000 of your years. I have watched civilizations rise from mud and fall to dust. I have spoken with your greatest minds and most terrible tyrants. And now, at the end, I find myself speaking with you. Kyle's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Dragons weren't real. Ancient beings didn't hide in museum storage rooms. He was having a stroke. A breakdown. Something. Your doubt is irrelevant, Zarathian said. I am dying whether you believe in me or not. My final wish is simple. Learn my name. Know what it means. Speak it with understanding before I am gone. But I don't know anything about dragons, Kyle protested. I barely finished high school. I don't speak ancient languages or whatever you need. You speak English. That will suffice. Zarathian's eye dimmed slightly. Zarathian means keeper of the last flame. I was the last of my kind to remember the old ways, the last to speak the true tongue, the last to guard the knowledge that your world has forgotten. The dragon's breathing became more labored. Kyle stepped closer, his fear evaporating in the face of something greater. This creature was dying, really dying, and it had chosen him for its final moments. There must be more, Kyle said. Keeper of the last flame can't be everything. Zarathian's eye brightened with something that might have been approval. You surprise me, human. Yes. There is more. I kept the flame of knowledge that your kind destroyed in your countless wars and burnings. Libraries burned to ash. Wisdom lost to time. I preserved it all here. The dragon gestured with one massive claw toward the cave walls. Kyle looked closer at the markings. They weren't random. They were organized. Structured. An entire library carved into living stone. No one remembers us now, Zarathian whispered. We became myths, legends, stories to frighten children. But we were real. We were the guardians of your potential. We watched you stumble toward enlightenment and tried to guide you when we could. Why hide? Kyle asked. If you were trying to help us, why disappear? because humanity decided we were monsters to be slain. Heroes built reputations on our corpses. I am the last because I learned to hide. But hiding meant failing our purpose. Zarathian coughed again. You have 30 seconds of my life left, human. Use them wisely. Kyle's mind cleared. He understood now. Zarathian, keeper of the last flame. The guardian who preserved human knowledge when humans themselves tried to destroy it. The last dragon who chose survival over purpose and now regrets that choice. The dragon's eye widened. You understand, you're dying alone in a museum storage room because you were afraid to help us anymore. Because we turned on you. Kyle knelt beside the massive head. But you never stopped caring. You hid here, in the Smithsonian, surrounded by human history. You couldn't let go. Zarathian's breathing stopped. For one terrible moment, Kyle thought he was too late. Then the dragon spoke again, its voice barely a whisper. Say my name, human. Say it with understanding. Kyle placed his hand on the dragon's scaled snout. The heat should have burned him, but didn't. Zarathian the Eternal, keeper of the last flame, guardian of human wisdom, the last dragon who loved us despite everything we did to your kind. Your name won't be forgotten. I won't let it be forgotten. The light in Zarathian's eye flared one final time. Thank you, Kyle Martinez. Yes, I know your name too. I have known it since the moment you entered this cave. You have my gratitude. And my gift? The dragon exhaled one last time. The breath washed over Kyle like a summer wind, and suddenly his mind exploded with information. Thousands of years of accumulated knowledge flooded into him, not overwhelming, not painful, perfectly organized and accessible, as if he'd always known it. Zarathian's body began to glow. The scales dissolved into golden light that rose toward the cavern ceiling and vanished. Within seconds, nothing remained but a perfectly circular indentation in the stone floor, and Kyle, kneeling alone in the impossible cave, the cavern shimmered. The walls rippled like water. Kyle stumbled backward as reality reasserted itself. The shelves returned. The climate control hummed back to life. He was standing in storage room 7 with his hand still extended toward empty air. But the knowledge remained. Every book Zarathian had saved. Every scroll and tablet and recorded conversation from 8,000 years of hidden history, all of it was now in Kyle's mind, perfectly preserved and completely accessible. Kyle walked slowly back to the hallway. His mop lay where he'd dropped it. The museum was silent. He checked his watch. Only 10 minutes had passed since he'd first heard the rumbling. 10 minutes that had changed everything. He picked up his mop and continued cleaning. But Kyle Martinez was no longer just a janitor. He was now the keeper of the last flame. And he had work to do. Morning came slowly to the Smithsonian. Kyle finished his shift on autopilot, his body going through familiar motions while his mind reeled from the impossible gift Zarathian had given him. He clocked out at 6 in the morning, nodded to the day shift supervisor, and walked out into the gray Washington dawn. The knowledge sat in his mind like a second library, perfectly cataloged and instantly accessible. He knew the precise chemical composition of the ink used by Sumerian scribes. He could recite entire philosophical treatises that had burned in the Library of Alexandria. Mathematical proofs that Newton had discovered but never published filled his thoughts alongside engineering diagrams for Roman siege weapons that would have made military historians weep with joy. But knowledge without action was just trivia. Zarathian hadn't given him this gift to waste. The question was what to do with it. Kyle rode the metro home in a daze. His tiny studio apartment in Silver Spring felt even smaller than usual. He sat on his second-hand couch and stared at the water-stained ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. A dragon had died in front of him. A real dragon? And now he carried 8,000 years of human history in his head. His phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor asking if he could cover another overnight shift. Kyle stared at the message for a long time. Yesterday he would have said yes without thinking. Extra money was always good, but today the thought of spending another night pushing a mop felt wrong. Wasteful. He typed back a reply declining the shift and lay down on his couch. Sleep should have been impossible, but exhaustion dragged him under within minutes. Kyle dreamed of dragons, not just Zarathian, but hundreds of them. Thousands. They filled the sky above ancient cities, their scales reflecting sunlight like mobile rainbows. They spoke with human scholars in gardens. They rescued lost travelers from mountain storms. They guided ships away from rocks and warned farmers of coming droughts. And then humans started hunting them. The dreams turned dark. Dragons fell from the sky with arrows in their hearts. They were poisoned at peace talks. betrayed by the very humans they'd tried to help. One by one they died or went into hiding until only Zarethian remained, bitter and afraid and alone. Kyle woke with tears on his face. The sun had set. He'd slept through the entire day. His phone showed dozens of missed calls from the museum. Apparently nobody could find several archive boxes that should have been in Storage Room 7. The day shift had searched everywhere. Kyle almost laughed. The boxes were fine. They'd never been in that room at all. Storage Room 7 had been something else entirely for one brief window of time. A pocket of possibility where the impossible became real. Now it was just a storage room again, and the missing boxes were probably misfiled somewhere else in the vast Smithsonian archive system. But that wasn't his problem anymore. Kyle stood and stretched. His body ached from sleeping on the couch, but his mind felt clearer than it had in years, maybe clearer than it had ever been. He knew what he needed to do. He spent the next 2 weeks planning, not the rushed, desperate planning of someone who didn't know what they were doing, the calm, methodical planning of someone with access to 8,000 years of accumulated wisdom about how to actually accomplish difficult goals. First, he needed money. Not a lot, but enough to buy time. Kyle had $17,000 in savings from 3 years of living cheaply and working double shifts. It wasn't enough to quit his job permanently, but it was enough to start. Second, he needed to make the knowledge accessible. It was one thing to carry this information in his head, it was another to share it with the world in a way people would actually listen to and believe. Just walking up to historians and claiming to know lost secrets would get him laughed out of every academic building in the country. Third, and most importantly, he needed to understand what Zarethian had really wanted. The dragon hadn't just handed over this knowledge for Kyle to sit on it. There was a purpose here, a reason. Kyle closed his eyes and searched through the gift. Deep in the organized chaos of 8 millennia of information, he found what he was looking for, Zarethian's own memories, given freely as part of the transfer. The dragon had watched humanity nearly destroy itself dozens of times, wars that almost ended civilization, plagues that came within a fraction of wiping out the species, famines that pushed entire continents to the brink. And every single time humans had pulled back from the edge, they'd found solutions, they'd adapted, they'd survived. But the cost kept getting higher. The margins kept getting thinner. Zarethian had hidden away because he was tired of watching humans hurt themselves, but he'd never stopped hoping they'd figure it out, that they'd finally learn from their mistakes. The dragon's final gift wasn't just knowledge, it was a challenge. Do better, be better. Use what you've been given to help your kind avoid the mistakes they keep making. Kyle opened his eyes. He knew exactly where to start. The next morning, he walked into the Department of Chemistry at Georgetown University. The building was exactly as Zarethian's memories showed it. Modern on the outside, but the foundation was much older. Kyle could see the layers of history written into the very stones. This place had been a center of learning for 200 years. He found Professor Linda Hayes in her office, exactly where he knew she'd be. She looked up from a stack of papers, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I have information about a chemical synthesis process that might interest you," Kyle said. "Specifically, a method for creating stable polymers from agricultural waste that would be completely biodegradable." Professor Hayes raised an eyebrow. "That's a very specific claim." "Are you a graduate student?" "I'm a janitor at the Smithsonian," Kyle said. "And I can prove everything I just said if you give me 30 minutes and access to a whiteboard." For a long moment, Professor Hayes just stared at him. Then she stood up and gestured to the door.
"You've got 15 minutes.
"Make them count." Kyle walked to her classroom and picked up a marker. His hand moved across the whiteboard with absolute confidence. Chemical formulas flowed from the marker like water. He wasn't copying from memory. He was understanding it all perfectly, seeing the relationships between elements and compounds as clearly as most people saw colors. Professor Hayes watched in growing amazement. After 5 minutes, she interrupted. "Where did you learn this?" "A dragon told me," Kyle said. Then he laughed at her expression. "Sorry, bad joke. I found some old research notes in the Smithsonian archives. Really old. I think they might be important. It was a lie, but a necessary one. People wouldn't believe the truth. They didn't need to. They just needed to believe the information was real." Professor Hayes stared at the whiteboard. "If this is accurate, you've just solved a problem that's stumped industrial chemists for 30 years. Do you understand what you're showing me?" "A way to turn corn stalks and wheat chaff into durable, biodegradable plastics without petroleum products," Kyle said. "Yes, I understand. That's why I'm here. Can you verify if the process actually works?" It'll take months of testing, Professor Hayes said. She was still staring at the whiteboard. Maybe years. But just the theoretical framework you've laid out here is publishable. Where exactly did you find these notes? Storage room 7, Kyle said, which was technically true. I was cleaning and saw some old filing boxes. Got curious. Professor Hayes pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the whiteboard. I'll need copies of the original documents, and I'll need to credit whoever actually developed this process. You said they were old notes? Very old, Kyle agreed. The author is listed as anonymous. I think they wanted the information shared but didn't care about recognition. That was close enough to Zarathian's perspective. The dragon had never wanted credit for the knowledge it preserved. It just wanted the knowledge to survive. Can you come back tomorrow? Professor Hayes asked. I want my colleague in material science to see this, and I'll need your contact information in case we have questions during the verification process. Kyle nodded and wrote down his phone number. As he left the chemistry building, he felt a strange sensation, something like satisfaction, but deeper. Zarathian's gift was being put to use, knowledge was flowing back into the world where it belonged. He spent the rest of the day visiting other departments. Agricultural science at the University of Maryland, where he shared irrigation techniques that would reduce water usage by 40%. Historical archives at the Library of Congress, where he pointed out mistranslations in ancient texts that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Medical research at Johns Hopkins, where he suggested a modification to an experimental cancer treatment that might solve a persistent side effect problem. Nobody believed he was just a janitor who'd stumbled across old notes, but nobody could deny that the information he provided was legitimate. Within 3 days, Kyle's phone was ringing constantly. Researchers wanted to meet with him. Universities wanted to hire him. Media outlets wanted interviews. Kyle ignored most of it. He wasn't interested in fame or money. He had a job to do. Zarathian had spent 8,000 years collecting human wisdom. The least Kyle could do was spend a few months distributing it back to the humans who needed it most. But not everyone appreciated his efforts. On the 4th day, Kyle noticed he was being followed. A black sedan with tinted windows stayed 3 cars behind him on his drive home. The same sedan was parked across from his apartment building when he looked out his window that evening. The knowledge Zarathian had given him included extensive information about espionage and surveillance throughout history. Kyle recognized the patterns immediately. Someone official had taken an interest in him. Probably multiple someones. He wasn't surprised. He'd been distributing advanced scientific information without proper credentials or authorization. Of course, various government agencies would want to know where he was getting it all. The question was whether they'd approach him peacefully or try something more aggressive. Kyle got his answer the next morning when 3 people in dark suits knocked on his door. The woman in front held up credentials identifying her as Agent Sarah Mitchell from the Department of Defense. Kyle Martinez? She asked. We need to talk about where you're really getting your information. Kyle stepped aside and let them in. This was inevitable. Time to find out if the government saw him as an asset or a threat. Agent Mitchell sat on Kyle's worn couch and studied him with cold professional eyes. You've caused quite a stir in the academic community, Mr. Martinez. In the past week, you've provided breakthrough solutions to problems that have stumped experts for decades. All of this while claiming to be a museum janitor who happened across some old notes. Kyle remained standing, his back to the kitchen counter. The notes are real. The information checks out. What's the problem? The problem is that no such notes exist in the Smithsonian archives, Mitchell said. We've checked thoroughly. Storage room 7 contains exactly what it's supposed to contain. Climate-controlled boxes of Native American pottery fragments from the 19th century, nothing more. Then I must have been mistaken about which room, Kyle said. The Smithsonian is a big place. Agent Mitchell's expression didn't change. We've also checked your background. You have no advanced degrees, no scientific training, no history of academic achievement beyond a mediocre high school diploma. Yet somehow you understand complex chemistry, advanced mathematics, historical linguistics, and agricultural engineering at a level that rivals world-class experts. I read a lot, Kyle offered. One of the other agents, a broad-shouldered man with a military bearing, snorted. Don't insult our intelligence. We know something happened. We need to know what. Kyle considered his options. He could keep lying, but they'd never believe him. He could tell the truth about Zarathian, but they definitely wouldn't believe that. Or he could offer them a deal. What if I told you I have access to a vast archive of information that was previously lost to history? Kyle said. Knowledge that could help solve some of the biggest problems facing humanity right now. Would you be interested in that? We're interested in everything about you, Mitchell said. The question is whether you're going to cooperate voluntarily or if we need to take a more direct approach. The threat hung in the air. Kyle's mind raced through Zarathian's memories of how governments dealt with people who had valuable information. The patterns were consistent across cultures and centuries. First they asked nicely, then they stopped asking. "I'll cooperate," Kyle said, "but I have conditions." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "I think I am," Kyle replied, "because I'm the only person who has access to this information. If something happens to me, it's lost forever. You can lock me up, but that doesn't get you what you want. Cooperation is your only real option." The broad-shouldered agent moved his hand toward his jacket. Mitchell held up one finger, stopping him. She studied Kyle's face for a long moment. "What are your conditions?" she finally asked. "First, I want immunity from prosecution for any and all information sharing I've done so far," Kyle said. "Second, I want protection. If various agencies know about me, so do other interested parties. I'll need security. Third, I want a say in how the information is used. I'm not handing over weapons technology or anything that could be used to hurt people. That third condition is a problem," Mitchell said. "National security requires that we evaluate all potential applications of the information you're providing." "National security is a nice phrase for we want everything," Kyle shot back. "I'm not giving you everything. Some knowledge needs to stay buried. Zarathian learned that lesson the hard way." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Who's Zarathian?" Kyle mentally kicked himself. The name had slipped out. Too late now. "The person who gave me access to this information. You wouldn't believe me if I told you the details." "Try us," the broad-shouldered agent said. Kyle took a deep breath. Zarathian was a dragon. The last dragon. He'd been hiding in the Smithsonian for decades, preserving human knowledge that had been lost over the centuries. He died a week ago and transferred everything to me with his final breath. That's the truth, believe it or not. The room was silent for several seconds. Then the third agent, a thin woman with sharp features who hadn't spoken yet, laughed. "A dragon? You expect us to believe you got your information from a fantasy creature?" "I expect you to believe I'm telling you what I know," Kyle said. "Whether you accept that explanation is up to you." Mitchell stood. "We're going to need you to come with us. There's a facility where we can conduct a proper debriefing." "Is that a request or an order?" Kyle asked. "It's reality," Mitchell said. "You have two choices. Come voluntarily and we'll discuss your conditions. Force us to bring you in, and you lose all leverage." Kyle nodded slowly. He'd known this moment was coming. Zarathian's memories included countless examples of individuals with valuable knowledge being detained by authorities. The pattern was universal. Cooperate and maybe retain some agency. Resist and lose everything. "I'll come voluntarily," Kyle said. "But I want the immunity agreement in writing before I share anything else." "Done," Mitchell said. "Pack a bag. You'll be gone for at least a few days." Kyle grabbed his old duffel bag and threw in some clothes. As he packed, his mind was already planning 3 steps ahead. The government would want everything Zarathian had given him. Every scrap of knowledge, every secret. Kyle needed to control the flow of information carefully. Some things were genuinely helpful and should be shared. Other things were dangerous in the wrong hands. The dragon had made that mistake before. 8,000 years ago, Zarathian had shared advanced metallurgy with a kingdom that promptly used it to forge weapons and conquer its neighbors. The guilt from that single act had haunted the dragon for millennia. Kyle wasn't going to repeat that error. They drove him to a nondescript office building in Virginia. No signs, no identifying markers, just gray concrete and tinted windows. Inside, the facility was a maze of corridors and secure rooms. Mitchell led him to a conference room with a table, 4 chairs, and nothing else. "Wait here," she said. "Someone will be with you shortly." Kyle sat and waited. The room had no windows and only one door. A camera in the corner tracked his movements. He resisted the urge to wave at it. 20 minutes later, the door opened. A man in his 60s entered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Kyle's car. His silver hair was perfectly styled and his expression was carefully neutral. "Mr. Martinez," the man said, not offering his hand. "I'm Director Morrison. I oversee certain special projects for the government. Agent Mitchell has briefed me on your situation. I find it all very interesting." "That's one word for it," Kyle said. Morrison sat across from him. "Let's establish some ground rules. You claim to have access to lost knowledge of historical significance. We want to verify this claim and determine the scope of what you know. If you're legitimate, we can discuss terms for ongoing cooperation." "And if you decide I'm not legitimate?" Kyle asked. Then this conversation ends, and you go home with our apologies for wasting your time, Morrison said smoothly. But something tells me we won't reach that conclusion. Kyle nodded. What do you want to know? Everything, Morrison said. But let's start with something verifiable. Tell me something about history that's not in any textbook, something specific that we can check. Kyle thought for a moment, then smiled. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell filed his patent for the telephone. What most people don't know is that he stole the core concept from Antonio Meucci, an Italian inventor who developed a working telephone years earlier but couldn't afford the patent fees. Meucci filed a patent caveat in 1871, but Bell's lawyers outmaneuvered him. The truth was buried in legal documents and forgotten. That's actually well documented, Morrison said. Try again. During World War II, the Nazis developed a prototype rocket-powered fighter plane called the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. History books will tell you about the successes and failures of that program. What they won't tell you is that 3 of those planes were captured intact by American forces and secretly shipped to Wright Field in Ohio. The official records say they were destroyed. They weren't. The research from those captured aircraft directly influenced American jet development for the next decade, but the government classified it all to avoid admitting we'd stolen Nazi technology. Morrison's expression didn't change, but Kyle caught a slight twitch in his left eye. Continue. The planes are probably still in storage somewhere, Kyle said, likely at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, assuming they haven't been moved. You could verify this with the right security clearances. We'll look into it, Morrison said. Give me something else, something we can verify faster. Kyle closed his eyes and searched through Zarathian's memories. There's a sealed chamber beneath the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. It was bricked up during renovations in 1847 by Sultan Abdul Mejid I. The chamber contains original Byzantine artwork and religious texts that were hidden to protect them from looters. The entrance is behind the northwest pillar on the ground floor. Turkish authorities don't know it exists because the renovation records were lost in a fire in 1923. Morrison pulled out his phone and typed rapidly. We'll verify. Keep going. For the next 3 hours, Kyle provided verifiable information. Lost documents, hidden chambers, historical events that had been deliberately obscured or accidentally forgotten. Every piece of information was specific enough to be checked, but not so sensitive that confirming it would cause international incidents. Morrison took notes on everything. His initial skepticism gradually shifted to fascination, then to something approaching awe. Around hour 4, he held up his hand. Stop, Morrison said. I've heard enough. We've been running checks on everything you've told us. So far, you're batting 1,000. The information about Wright-Patterson is classified above my clearance level, but I'm told your description of the aircraft storage is disturbingly accurate. So you believe me, Kyle said. I believe you have access to information that shouldn't exist, Morrison replied. The dragon story I'm setting aside for now. What matters is that you're legitimate, which means we need to talk seriously about how to handle this situation. Kyle leaned forward. I told Agent Mitchell my conditions: immunity, protection, and control over how the information is used. Are those terms acceptable? Morrison considered. Immunity is simple. We can draft that paperwork tonight. Protection is also straightforward. We'll assign a security detail. The third condition is where things get complicated. I'm not negotiable on that point, Kyle said. I understand your concern, Morrison said, but you're asking for veto power over government decisions regarding potentially critical information. That's not something we can grant to a civilian with no oversight. Then we have a problem, Kyle said, because I'm not turning over anything that could be weaponized. Zarathians spent 8,000 years watching humans destroy themselves with knowledge they weren't ready for. I'm not making that mistake. Morrison drummed his fingers on the table. What if we compromise? You provide information to a joint committee consisting of scientists, ethicists, and security professionals. They evaluate each piece of knowledge for potential applications. You get to make your case for why something shouldn't be shared, but the final decision rests with the committee.
Kyle thought about it.
It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. Who's on this committee? People I trust, Morrison said. People who understand that some knowledge is dangerous. You'll get to meet them before agreeing to anything. If you don't approve of the committee composition, we'll renegotiate. I want it in writing that I can walk away at any time, Kyle said. If I don't like how things are going, I stop cooperating and you leave me alone. Agreed, Morrison said, with the caveat that you can't share information with anyone else without approval from the committee. We can't have you shopping state secrets to foreign governments or posting them on the internet. Fair enough, Kyle said. When do I meet this committee? Morrison smiled. It was the first genuine expression Kyle had seen from him. They're waiting in the next room. I had them standing by in case you agreed to terms. Kyle couldn't help but laugh. You were pretty confident. You came here voluntarily, Morrison said. That told me you wanted to work with us, not against us. The negotiation was just about finding terms we could both accept. Morrison led Kyle through the secure facility to a larger conference room. 5 people sat around a polished wood table. Kyle recognized one of them immediately. Professor Linda Hayes from Georgetown, the chemist he'd shared the polymer research with. Professor Hayes? Kyle said. What are you doing here? She smiled. Turns out when you give someone revolutionary scientific information, they ask questions. Questions that led back to Agent Mitchell and Director Morrison. I've been read into your situation. I'm here as the scientific representative on the committee. Morrison introduced the others. Dr. James Park, an ethicist from Harvard. General Robert Allen, retired Air Force. Dr. Susan Chen, a historian from Yale. And Father David Murphy, a Catholic priest and theologian. This is your oversight committee, Morrison said. They represent different perspectives on how to evaluate and use the information you're providing. Each has been fully briefed and signed enough non-disclosure agreements to wallpaper a house. Kyle studied the 5 faces. They looked back at him with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. You all know about the dragon? We know what you told Agent Mitchell, Dr. Chen said. Whether we believe it is another matter. But we don't need to believe your source to recognize that you have legitimate historical knowledge. I'd like to believe it, Father Murphy said quietly. Dragons in Christian tradition are complex symbols. The idea that one might have existed as a guardian of wisdom is theologically fascinating. Let's focus on practical matters, General Allen said. His voice had the clipped precision of a lifelong military man. Mr. Martinez, you claim to have knowledge that could be weaponized. Can you give us an example? Kyle nodded. Zarathian's memories include detailed plans for a biological agent that was developed in the 13th century, a plague weapon that makes the Black Death look gentle. It was never deployed because the people who created it recognized how dangerous it was. They destroyed all records of it. Except Zarathian remembered. The room went very quiet. That's exactly the kind of information that needs to stay buried, Dr. Park said. The ethics are clear. No possible good could come from releasing that knowledge. Agreed, Kyle said. That's why I'm never sharing it. But there are gray areas. What about advanced surveillance technology? Or methods for manipulating public opinion that were used in ancient Rome? Some knowledge is dangerous, but also already partially known. Where do we draw the line? That's what this committee is for, Professor Hayes said. We'll evaluate each case individually. If we can't reach a consensus, we'll bring in additional experts. Morrison cleared his throat. Mr. Martinez, the committee has already reviewed the information you've shared so far. The polymer research, the irrigation techniques, the historical corrections. All of it has been approved for limited academic distribution. Is there anything else you'd like to propose? Kyle thought about the vast library in his mind. 8,000 years of human achievement and failure. So much knowledge that could help. So much that could hurt. I have medical information, Kyle said slowly. Treatments for diseases that modern medicine has forgotten. Some of it is based on plants that might be extinct. Some of it is surgical techniques that were lost when libraries burned. I think that knowledge could save lives. Dr. Park leaned forward. Can you give us a specific example? There's a parasitic infection common in parts of Africa and South America. Current treatments have serious side effects. But there was a treatment used by indigenous healers in Peru in the 16th century that was nearly perfect. It was based on a specific combination of local plants. The Spanish conquistadors destroyed most knowledge of indigenous medicine, but Zarathian preserved the formula. Professor Hayes pulled out a tablet and started taking notes. If you can provide the exact combination and dosages, we could test it. This is exactly the kind of information that should be shared. With proper precautions, Dr. Chen added. We'll need to verify the information before releasing it publicly. Medical claims require rigorous testing. Of course, Kyle agreed. I'm not asking you to take my word for anything. Test it all. Verify everything. I just want to make sure the knowledge isn't lost again. General Allen spoke up. What about military applications? Do you have information about weapons or tactics that could be useful? Kyle met the general's eyes. I have information about how to defend against weapons, how to build fortifications that can withstand modern artillery, how to supply armies in hostile territory, defensive information that could save soldiers' lives. but I'm not sharing offensive weapons technology. Why not? Alan asked. Wars happen whether we like it or not. Having superior weapons could save American lives. Having superior weapons encourages wars, Kyle countered. Zarathian watched that pattern repeat for 8 millennia. Every time one side developed a new weapon, it sparked an arms race. The weapons got worse. The casualties got higher. Eventually, somebody invented something so terrible that everyone was afraid to use it. Then we called that peace and pretended we'd learned something. Nuclear deterrence works, Alan said flatly. Until it doesn't, Kyle replied. I'm not giving anyone the tools to make a better bomb. But I'll share information about armor, logistics, field medicine, anything that protects people instead of killing them more efficiently. Alan's expression was unreadable. After a long pause, he nodded. I can accept those terms. Defensive information only. Morrison looked around the table. Are we in agreement? Mr. Martinez cooperates with this committee. He provides information. We evaluate it. He gets veto power over anything we deem too dangerous, but he has to justify his concerns. If we can't reach a consensus, we bring in additional experts until we do. Everyone nodded. Then let's make it official, Morrison said. He slid a thick folder across the table to Kyle. This is your immunity agreement. Read it carefully. Sign it if you're satisfied. Then we can get to work. Kyle spent 20 minutes reading through the legal language. It was surprisingly straightforward. He couldn't be prosecuted for any information sharing he'd done or would do as part of this agreement. He was granted government protection. He maintained veto power over the committee's decisions regarding what information to release, and he could terminate the agreement at any time with 30 days' notice. He signed on the last page. So what happens now? Now you start sharing, Morrison said. Systematically, we'll set you up with a secure workspace. You'll have access to the committee members whenever you need to consult, and we'll begin the slow process of reintroducing lost knowledge to the world. Slowly, Kyle emphasized. Zarathian's biggest mistake was moving too fast. He'd give humans advanced knowledge, and they'd use it before they were ready. We need to be careful. Agreed, Dr. Park said. Each release needs to be carefully considered. Kyle felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't alone in this anymore. He had help. Smart people who understood the responsibility. Maybe this can actually work. Father Murphy spoke up. Mr. Martinez, I have a question that's been bothering me. You said Zarathian was the last dragon. Does that mean there were others? And if so, where did they go? Kyle closed his eyes and searched through the memories. There were hundreds once, maybe thousands. They were scholars and guardians. They helped humans develop agriculture, mathematics, writing. But as human civilization grew, we started seeing them as threats, monsters to be slain. So we hunted them. The Dragon Slayer myths, Dr. Chen said softly. St. George, Beowulf, Perseus. Every culture has them. Every culture killed them, Kyle said. The dragons who survived went into hiding. They disguised themselves, retreated to remote places. But human expansion never stopped. We spread across the entire planet. There was nowhere left to hide. One by one, they died. Zarathian was the last because he found the best hiding spot. Right here in Washington, in the heart of human civilization. Nobody thought to look for a dragon in a museum. That's beautiful and tragic, Father Murphy said. A creature that loved humanity enough to preserve its knowledge even after humanity destroyed its kind. He never stopped caring, Kyle said, even at the end. His last act was to give me this gift, to give us all one more chance to do better. The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Morrison cleared his throat. And let's not waste his sacrifice. We have work to do. Over the next 3 months, Kyle worked with the committee to carefully release information back into the world. Medical treatments were tested and verified before being published in peer-reviewed journals. Agricultural techniques were piloted in small test farms before being recommended for wider adoption. Historical discoveries were confirmed through archaeological expeditions before being announced publicly. The work was slow, frustratingly slow at times. But Kyle understood the necessity. Rushing would create problems. Zarathian had learned that lesson over and over again throughout his long life. Not every piece of knowledge could be shared. The committee rejected Kyle's proposal to release advanced energy generation methods because they could too easily be weaponized. They rejected information about mind-altering substances despite their potential medical applications. They rejected architectural techniques that could make buildings nearly indestructible because the materials required were too environmentally destructive to produce. But they approved more than they rejected. Clean water purification methods for developing nations, crop rotation patterns that could reduce pesticide use by 70%, mathematical proofs that solved problems that had puzzled experts for decades, surgical techniques that reduced recovery time and complications. Kyle watched the knowledge spread through academic journals and conference presentations. Slowly but steadily, Zarethian's gift was making its way back into human consciousness. It felt right, like finishing something the dragon had started 8,000 years ago. Professor Hayes became Kyle's closest ally on the committee. She understood the science better than anyone else and could identify which information would have the biggest impact. They spent long hours discussing research priorities over coffee in the facility's break room. "You've changed the world," she told him one evening. "These treatments we've released are going to save thousands of lives, maybe millions eventually." "Zarathian changed the world," Kyle corrected. "I'm just the delivery mechanism." "Don't sell yourself short," Hayes said. "The dragon gave you knowledge, but you're the one who decided to share it responsibly. You could have sold it to the highest bidder. You could have kept it to yourself. Instead, you brought it to us and trusted us to help you use it wisely." Kyle shrugged. It was never really mine, just on loan. His life had changed dramatically since that night in Storage Room 7. He'd quit his janitorial job. The government was paying him a consultant salary that seemed ridiculous for what he did. He'd moved into a nicer apartment with actual furniture instead of secondhand cast-offs, but none of that felt important. What mattered was the work. Every day he woke up knowing he was helping fulfill Zarethian's final wish. The dragon's name wouldn't be forgotten. His sacrifice wouldn't be wasted. Human knowledge that had been lost to time was being recovered and shared. It was slow. It was careful. But it was happening. 6 months after Zarathian's death, Kyle was sitting in the facility break room when Agent Mitchell found him. She was smiling, which was unusual. Mitchell rarely smiled. "We have a situation," she said. "But I think you're going to like this one." Kyle followed her to Morrison's office. The director was standing at his window, looking out over the Virginia landscape. He turned when Kyle entered. "We've been monitoring for any unusual activity related to your work," Morrison said. "Cross-referencing old historical records, archaeological surveys, that sort of thing. One of our researchers found something interesting." He pulled up a document on his computer and turned the screen toward Kyle. It showed an old map of Scotland with several locations marked in red. "These are sites where dragon legends are particularly strong," Morrison explained. "Caves where dragons supposedly lived. Mountains they flew around, that kind of thing. We've been checking them with ground-penetrating radar and other survey tools. Most of them are empty. Just caves, but one of them isn't." Kyle leaned closer to the screen. A location in the Scottish Highlands was marked with a bright red circle. Next to it was a radar image showing what looked like a large chamber deep underground. "What did you find?" Kyle asked. "We don't know yet," Morrison said, "but the chamber is artificial. Someone or something carved it out of solid rock. And it's big. Bigger than anything humans could have created with the tools available in the medieval period. We're putting together an expedition. We'd like you to come along." Kyle's heart raced. "You think it might be another dragon?" "I think it might be something a dragon left behind," Morrison said. "And if it is, you're the person best qualified to understand what we find." 2 weeks later, Kyle stood at the entrance to a cave in the Scottish Highlands. Wind whipped across the mountainside, carrying the scent of heather and rain. The cave mouth was small, barely wide enough for a person to walk through single file, but ground-penetrating radar said it opened up deeper inside. Professor Hayes was with him, along with Agent Mitchell, a team of archaeologists, and enough security personnel to invade a small country. They'd kept the expedition quiet. Morrison didn't want attention until they knew what they were dealing with. Kyle stepped into the cave. The temperature dropped immediately. His flashlight beam cut through darkness that felt solid, ancient. The passage wound deeper into the mountain, gradually widening until the group could walk side by side. After 10 minutes of careful progress, the passage opened into a massive chamber. Kyle's flashlight beam couldn't reach the far walls. The ceiling was lost in shadows overhead, and covering every surface were carvings. "My God," one of the archaeologists whispered. Kyle walked to the nearest wall and held up his light. The carvings were beautiful, precise. They showed dragons in flight, dragons speaking with humans, dragons teaching and guiding and protecting. An entire history carved into stone. "It's a library," Kyle said softly. Another Zarethian wasn't the only dragon who tried to preserve knowledge. Professor Hayes moved to another wall. Her light revealed more carvings, mathematical equations, chemical formulas, star charts. "This is incredible. If we can translate all of this, we won't need to translate it," Kyle said. He placed his hand on the stone and closed his eyes. The moment his skin touched the carved rock, information flooded into his mind. Not overwhelming like Zarathian's gift had been, more like a gentle stream, filling in gaps and expanding what he already knew. The chamber had been created by a dragon named Catharis the Wise. She'd been Zarathian's contemporary, one of the last of their kind. While Zarathian had hidden himself in a museum, Catharis had chosen to leave a message. A warning, a hope. Kyle opened his eyes. She knew humans would find this eventually. She wanted us to find it. This is a message for the future? What does it say? Agent Mitchell asked. Kyle turned to face the group. It says that knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. That humans have the capacity for both greatness and terrible destruction. That we need to choose carefully which path we follow. And it says... He paused, reading the final carving that covered the back wall. It says that there's still hope. That humanity isn't doomed to destroy itself. That we're capable of learning from our mistakes if we try. Father Murphy, who'd insisted on joining the expedition, moved closer to the back wall. A message of redemption. Even after everything we did to their kind, they still believed in us. They never stopped believing, Kyle said. That's why they tried so hard to help us, even when we turned on them. Even when we hunted them to extinction. They kept trying because they saw our potential. Professor Hayes was taking measurements and photographs for Scientific Mind, cataloging everything. This will take years to properly document. Decades, maybe. But the knowledge here could revolutionize our understanding of history. Morrison, who'd been watching quietly from the entrance, spoke up. How much of this can be shared publicly? Kyle searched through the information Catharis had left. Most of it. She was careful. No weapons. No dangerous knowledge. Just history, science, mathematics. Things that could help us grow without destroying ourselves. Then we'll bring in a proper team, Morrison said. Document everything. Translate what we can. And release it all through appropriate channels. Kyle nodded, but his attention was fixed on one final carving near the chamber's center. It was different from the others, more personal. What's that? Agent Mitchell asked, noticing his focus. Kyle read the ancient script. The words were in a language no human had spoken for thousands of years, but he understood them perfectly. It's a message from Catharis to whoever found this place. She says, "We dragons lived for millennia, but our time is past. Now it is your time, humanity's time. We leave you this gift not because you deserve it, but because you might. Not because you are perfect, but because you can grow. We believe in your potential even when you do not believe in it yourselves. Please, prove us right." The chamber fell silent. Kyle felt tears on his face and didn't bother wiping them away. 2 dragons, 2 final messages. 2 last hopes that humanity would choose wisdom over destruction. We have to prove them right, Professor Hayes said quietly. After everything they sacrificed for us, we owe them that much. Kyle looked around at the assembled group. Scientists, soldiers, scholars, priests, all of them standing in a chamber carved by a creature that shouldn't exist, left as a gift for a species that had destroyed her kind. It was absurd. It was beautiful. It was humanity's second chance. Then let's get to work, Kyle said. We have 8,000 years of lost knowledge to recover, and this time we're going to use it right. 10 years passed. Kyle Martinez became a name known in academic circles around the world, though few outside those circles understood why. The government kept his story classified, but his contributions to science, medicine, and agriculture were undeniable. Papers bearing his name appeared in journals across dozens of disciplines. Universities fought over the chance to work with him. But Kyle never forgot where it all came from. He visited Storage Room 7 every year on the anniversary of Zarathian's death. The room was still just a storage room, full of pottery fragments and carefully cataloged artifacts. But Kyle would sit in the center of the floor for an hour, remembering the impossible cavern and the dying dragon who'd trusted a janitor with 8,000 years of accumulated wisdom. The committee continued to meet regularly, though they'd expanded over the years. New experts joined as new categories of knowledge were evaluated. The work never stopped. Every month brought new discoveries from Catharis's chamber in Scotland. Archaeological teams from a dozen countries worked to document every carving, every formula, every piece of preserved wisdom. The world changed slowly. Clean water technology reached developing nations. New medical treatments reduced childhood mortality. Agricultural methods increased crop yields without destroying soil or requiring harmful pesticides. It wasn't dramatic. Most people didn't notice the changes happening around them, but the changes were real. Professor Hayes retired from Georgetown but continued working with the committee. She'd published 17 papers based on information Kyle had provided, each one pushing her field forward in significant ways. She visited Kyle's office one afternoon and found him staring at a photograph on his desk. "Is that from the Scottish Chamber?" she asked. Kyle nodded. The photograph showed the final carving, Catharis' message to humanity. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing enough?" Kyle asked. "We've released so much knowledge, saved so many lives. But the world is still full of wars and suffering and stupidity." Hayes sat down across from him. "You sound like you're losing faith." "Maybe I am," Kyle admitted. "Zarathian and Catharis spent millennia trying to help us. They gave everything. And we're still making the same mistakes, fighting over resources, destroying the environment, refusing to learn from history. But we're also doing better," Hayes said gently. "Infant mortality is down globally. Literacy is up, renewable energy is expanding, wars are becoming less common. The trend lines are all moving in the right direction, even if it's slower than we'd like." "Is it enough?" Kyle asked. "Probably not," Hayes admitted. "But it's something, and something is better than nothing. The dragons didn't expect us to become perfect, they just hoped we'd try to be better." Kyle looked at the photograph again. "I wish I could have known them, both of them. I have their memories, but that's not the same as actually meeting them, hearing them speak, learning from them directly." "You're carrying on their work," Hayes said. "That's the best way to honor their memory. They're not forgotten. Not as long as people like you remember what they tried to do." Kyle smiled. "I'm just a janitor who got lucky." "You were a janitor who listened when a dragon spoke," Hayes corrected. "Most people wouldn't have. They would have run away or convinced themselves they were hallucinating. You stayed. You learned. You accepted the responsibility." "That takes courage." "Or stupidity," Kyle said. "Sometimes those are the same thing," Hayes replied. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "You know, in all the years I've known you, you've never told me what that first moment was like, when Zarathian's knowledge transferred to you. What did it feel like?" Kyle thought back to that night in the impossible cavern. "It felt like waking up, like I'd been half asleep my entire life and suddenly everything came into focus. All the connections between things, all the patterns in history and science and human behavior. It was overwhelming and perfect at the same time." "Do you ever wish you could go back?" Hayes asked. "To before? When you were just a janitor?" "Every day," Kyle admitted. "And never. It's complicated." Hayes nodded. "Most important things are. I'll see you at next month's committee meeting. We're reviewing your proposal about the irrigation systems. I think it's going to pass." After she left, Kyle sat alone in his office. The photograph of Catharis' message stared back at him. 10 years of work, thousands of lives improved or saved, entire fields of study revolutionized, and still so much left to do. His phone rang. Director Morrison. "Kyle, we have a situation. Can you come to the facility?" "What kind of situation?" "We found another chamber. This one in Peru." Kyle grabbed his jacket. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As he drove to the facility, Kyle thought about Zarathian's final words. "Thank you, Kyle Martinez. Yes, I know your name too. I have known it since the moment you entered this cave. You have my gratitude and my gift." The gift had been heavy, challenging, sometimes overwhelming. But Kyle wouldn't give it back even if he could. This was his purpose, his contribution to the long struggle of humanity trying to become better than itself. There were more chambers to discover, more knowledge to recover, more work to do. The dragons might be gone, but their legacy continued. And as long as Kyle Martinez was alive, he'd make sure that legacy wasn't wasted. He pulled into the facility parking lot and headed inside. Whatever they'd found in Peru, he'd help them understand it. He'd evaluate it carefully. He'd make sure it was used wisely. That's what Zarathian and Catharis would have wanted. That's what they'd died hoping humanity would do. The last dragon's final wish had been simple. Find the human who knows my name. Kyle had done more than that. He'd learned everything the dragons had tried to teach humanity over 8,000 years, and now he was teaching it forward, one careful step at a time. It was slow work, frustrating work, but it was also the most important work Kyle could imagine. The dragons had believed in humanity's potential even when humanity didn't believe in itself. The least Kyle could do was try to prove them right. He walked into Morrison's office, ready for whatever came next. The work wasn't finished, and might never be finished. But that was okay. Some things were worth spending a lifetime on. and honoring the memory of the last dragon was definitely one of them.